Guys, we're ready to do the July Kimberbell Club project, which is the Daisy pincushion, and so it's a great place to hold your little quilt clips also. So let's get started. Okay, so what you're going to need will be the kit, or if you didn't purchase a kit, then on your instructions it tells you how big a piece to cut for everything. But in the kit it has the 2 pieces for the petals, and then there's 2 pieces for the bottom of the pincushion, the piece that's the center, and then the piece of flex foam. And then you'll also need your Kimberbell tape. I'm going to use pinking shears to cut the petals out, and then I have a couple tools we're going to use to turn the petals right side out. Then in the instructions it says to stuff it with some of the just stuffing polyfill. I also have some of the ground nutshells that I might use. Now for the stabilizer that you need, you're going to need a piece of the medium weight cutaway, then a piece of the poly mesh stabilizer, and a piece of the water soluble topping, or the Stitch 2.0. And I thought I would show you the importance of keeping your label that comes with your stabilizer and either wrapping it around the outside of the tube or sticking it down inside the tube, because I was scrounging around trying to find the medium weight cutaway. I didn't want to substitute the heavyweight cutaway with the petals because I did think that that would be too hard to turn them right side out. It would be too stiff. And so I had this roll that apparently I have lost my label, and I wasn't sure if it was medium weight or heavyweight. I could kind of tell by the feel this is a little bit softer than the heavyweight, so I am hoping that this is the medium weight. So just remember, keep your label and with the roll, and either wrap it around it or stick it up inside your tube. Now there's 2 stitch files with this design, and the first one's going to be the petals, and so we're going to hoop up the medium weight cutaway, and both of the stitch files can be done in the 5x7 hoop. So we'll get this hooped up and over to the machine. Okay, so on your USB stick with your download, you'll have 2 designs. The first one we're going to do is the petals, so I'm going to bring that one up. And thread wise, I would probably stitch all this off maybe with an off-white color thread. I'm going to go ahead and use the yellow color just so maybe you can see it a little bit better on the camera. So the first thing it's going to stitch off is just a placement line for your 2 petal fabric. So that's going to be the peach and the yellow. And you want to take these 2 pieces of fabric while it's stitching this placement line, take them and put them right sides together, and then we're going to lay this on top of the placement line. Okay, so after it does the placement line, you're just going to take your 2 pieces, make sure they are right sides together, and then lay them on top of that placement line, and then it's going to stitch a little tack down, and then also what they're calling the cutting line. Okay, and so that's why I wanted the yellow thread, and I'm doing it with the peach fabric on top so that I can see my yellow thread a little bit better. So this is just going to be the tack down to hold the 2 pieces together. Might kind of smooth them out so we don't get a bubble in the middle of it. And then it'll come back and stitch what they're calling the cutting line. And it does say to do this in a visible color of thread. So this is when it's going to go around all the little petals. So we will come back when it's done doing this. Now this is the last cutting line that it's stitching here, and so all we're going to do is just start the machine again, and what it's going to stitch now is going to be actually the seam line. So this is where it's actually sewing the 2 pieces together. So we will come back when it's done doing this part. so it's finished stitching the seam line on all of them. And so now we're done. Well, we're done stitching that first section. So we're going to unhoop it. And then this is where I'm going to use the pinking shears. And so what I'm going to do, it says to cut on the cutting line, which is the outside line. On the seam line, it did like a little triple stitch around each of them, so you can tell the difference. And I'm just going to take my pinking shears and go right to the inside basically of both of them, and that way I don't have to come back and clip the notches and everything. So it's just a lot easier to do with the pinking shears. And just be careful and not to cut the stitches, the seam line. You will be cutting that cut line. Now with the base at the bottom, I'm just going to use my regular scissors for that, and I am going to be cutting on the line, so that, because that's going to be the opening to turn them right side out. So you'll turn them through that little opening right there, but we'll get to that here in a minute. So I'm just going to finish trimming each one, each petal. So again, just go right to the inside between. Now if you don't have pinking shears, just the instructions say to cut on the cutting line, and then just take your scissors and clip those little notches around the curve, and the notches just help it turn a lot smoother and prettier. So we'll be back when I've got all of these cut out. Okay, so we got the petals, most of them, cut out and turned, and while I was cutting them out, Bailey was turning them right side out, so she's going to show how to turn them.
So if you did a pair of alligator clamps or like hemostats, and then you're going to go in between your pink and yellow fabric, and so just stitch those up and open them up, and then you can just kind of stuff with your finger the tip of the petal, and then you're just going to pull it inside out, and it may take a second. But once you have that pulled, you can take one of the point and press tools or the purple things or whatever you have and just poke out all your corners. And I'm just kind of sliding it around the edge of the petal, and that'll get them turned.
Okay, so what we're going to do now, it says in the instructions, after you have them turned right side out, we're just going to go press them, and then we'll come back and start the construction. Okay, now you have 8 petals, and they're reversible basically, and so you're going to have 4 on the peach side that show, and then 4 on the yellow side. So I'm just pressing them that way, so the pretty side will be up. So just give them a good press on all of them, and then we'll go back to the embroidery machine. Okay, so we're now on part 2, stitching the pincushion, and this is on page 6 of your instructions, and we're going to go get the second part of the design. But I wanted to show you something on the machine. I've gone into the July folder, and Kimberbell does this. So you have in that folder, you'll have the embroidery files, you'll have the instructions, you won't have the shop resources, but you may have like the SVG files. And on this machine, I can kind of see the whole file name, but on some of the machines that have the smaller icons, you can't see the whole name. Well, they come up in alphabetical order, so embroidery files will always, usually, most often, will be your first file, because then it'll be the instructions and then the SVG files. So if you can't see the whole name, more than likely your embroidery file will be in the first one. So maybe that will help. And then we'll go into the PES, and I'm going to go get the second stitch out, and then send that to the machine. I'm still using the yellow thread, and then I've just hooped up the piece of the poly mesh no-sew mesh. So this is not water soluble, this is just the regular polyester no-sew mesh. And what it's going to stitch out first, oh, does that happen too? Sometimes you go and it won't start, and because you've forgotten to lower that down. That happens. And what it's going to stitch out first is just the placement line, and after it stitches that, we're going to take just one of the green pieces of fabric, okay. Then we're just going to lay one of the pieces of green fabric down, and it's going to stitch the tack down. And in the instructions it does say do not trim the fabric at this time after it stitches this. Okay, now what it's going to do is stitch another little placement line here in the center, and this is going to be the placement line for the petals. So it's just the inside one. So we'll come back when it's done stitching this. Okay, so on your instructions on step 7, it's saying to place the petals exactly, so the edge of the petals exactly on that placement line, and then an alternate them. So you'll do a yellow and then a peach all the way around. Oh, yellow. And then it says to tape them exactly as shown. So going to tape them exactly as shown. So they're using 4 pieces of tape. So one piece will cover up 2 of them pretty much. And it says this will keep your foot from catching on the petals. Yeah. So we'll just keep an eye on it too, just to make sure. Okay, and now put the hoop back on the machine and stitch the tack down. Okay, and it says to remove the tape. And Bailey and I thought, well, why couldn't we put the water soluble topping down before we stitch this tack down to keep your foot from catching? But then you wouldn't be able to remove the tape because your water soluble would be on top of it. So this is when it is a good idea to follow the instructions and do what they tell you. Okay, this is going to take me a minute to get all this tape out of here, so we'll come back. Okay, now we've got all the tape removed, and then we're going to take that piece of water soluble topping, the Stitch 2-0, and tape it down. Mine is kind of big, so I'm just going to tape it down here and at the top. And then what it's going to stitch next, it's saying, is the placement line for the piece of flex foam. Saying to do now is go ahead after it stitches that down, before you put the stitch 2-0, before you put the flex foam down, remove that topping here in the center. So I'm gonna get a hold of it and tear it out of there. I don't want to tear my stitches, so I'm gonna trim it. Just be careful, don't trim your petals. It only stitched around it once, so I don't want to tear too hard. There we go. Then we're going to lay the piece of flex foam down, and I am going to tape this down also because I don't want it to shift. And then it's going to stitch the tack down. This is going to make our pin cushion poofy. Now we're going to trim the flex foam, and the water soluble topping is just helping us not to catch the petals with our scissors. So just go right around and let the scissors just, you know, what's the word? Graze? What's the word? When it graze the water soluble underneath. And these scissors don't squeak. I need to take these scissors to the store and bring the ones that squeak home. Okay. Then next it's going to stitch the placement line for the piece of fabric. This one you could skip if you wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and stitch it. And we're going to lay the center piece of fabric down, and it's going to stitch the tack down. You can come back if you want. Okay, had to let Bailey's arms rest for a minute. So after it stitches the tack down for the fabric, then you're just going to go in and trim the fabric away. And then this is where, if you didn't have yellow thread in your machine, you would want to thread up because it's going to do a satin stitch around this fabric. And so since I already had yellow in the machine, I don't need to rethread. And it's just going to do a satin stitch all the way around this. And you still have the water soluble topping up underneath there to help you so you don't catch your petals. And so we will come back when it's done doing the satin stitch. Done with the satin stitch, go ahead and take the hoop off the machine, but don't unhoop it because we're not done yet. I guess you could if you wanted to. I just thought of that. If you wanted to be done, you could take it out and then use this as a little jar topper, maybe. That'd be cute. Put it on top of a jar. But what we're going to do now is tear this topping away. actually that would be really cute because you could take the jar, make the pincushion on top. You might want to make this a little poofier, and then put your quilt clips down in the jar. That would be cute. Okay, but we're not doing that. So now what it says to do in the instructions is take your petals and fold them to the inside here, and then tape them down. And so I got a long piece of tape. Two long pieces of tape. Okay, just make sure those are kind of taped down out of the way. And then you're taking the other piece of green fabric and put it right side down on top of that. And then what it's going to stitch off last is going to be the construction line on the outside, and it is going to be leaving an opening over here on this side to turn it right side out. So I'm just going to kind of hold this in place while it stitches that final seam line. So it's done stitching that. We can unhoop it now. And then what they're doing in step 24, on step 24 and 25, they just want you to know and kind of see where this opening is. So what it's telling you to do is take your fabric and fold it down so that it's about 1/8 of an inch away from that little seam line there, and put a crease. So just crease it there, and then do the same thing here on this side. Just fold it down and then crease that. So you're just putting these creases in there so when we cut this out, we can see where that is. So then we unfold it and we can see those crease lines. And so now on step, that's where you unfold it, 27, we're cutting, and we're going to turn this over and we're going to cut directly on this cutting line on the outside. But then it says trim the fabric along the opening a 1/4 inch wider than the fold lines. So I'm going to trim that side first. So a 1/4 inch beyond that fold line. So I'm going to come here and trim about a 1/4 inch away on that line, away from that line, and then about a 1/4 inch away from that line. So we just want to make those a little bit bigger. Then I'm going to turn this over and trim the rest of it right on that first trim line or placement line. Okay, and I'm going to go in and kind of trim those little corners too. And that one. Okay, and then we're just going to turn it right side out through that opening. I'm going to leave the petals kind of taped in place until we get it stuffed. And poke out those corners there. And I'm going to run to the iron and press this a little bit from the back side, just a little bit. And then we'll come back and we'll stuff it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I want some of the walnut shells, I think, just because, one, I want the weight of it to help kind of weight the pin cushion down a little bit, and then the shells also are supposed to help, you know, keep your pins sharp and all. And so I'm doing about a little less than 1/3 of a cup. And so I'm going to open it up, and then I have my funnel, and hopefully I can do this one-handed or without Bailey. And then just, oh, easy. Shake it down in there. Okay. Then I'm going to kind of shake that to the bottom of, and that kind of filled it up about a little more than halfway. Okay. Then I'm going to just stuff the rest of it with a little bit of the polyfill, and then I can kind of mush it and squish it around, and it'll incorporate the polyfill with the walnut shells. And then we are going to have to sew this opening shut, because I don't think steam-a-seam or anything like that will hold it as tightly as stitching it together. And maybe just a little bit more. I have a fat pincushion. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just go to my sewing machine, and I'm going to fold these edges under. You just have to be real careful if you're going to do this at your machine and not get those shells mixed, spill out into your machine. So I'm going to fold this under, and I'm going to pin it or even clip it into place like that, and then I'm just going to stitch this at my sewing machine. Let me get this kind of pinned in place, and then we'll go to the machine and I'll show you. Okay, so I've just pinned my opening shut, and yes, this would probably be neater if you did it by hand. You would have little points better, but I don't have time to do it by hand, and I want mine to stay shut. So I'm using the edge stitch foot, and I've just threaded up with green thread top and bobbin, and I've got to move my needle position over. You don't want to lengthen up your stitch length or anything, because you want these stitches to be pretty small so that it will, you don't have any of those walnut shells spilling out. And then I'm just going to keep the edges right up against that edge stitch foot. Turn and pivot there. I'm taking my pins out before I get to them, and I did back stitch good beginning and end. And there we go. And then I need to clip my threads, and then I'll just take the tape off, and my little petals will hide that. There we go. And we have a cute little pincushion. I'm just going to squish the walnut shells around, and there are my pins. Pretty cute.